Webinar. Oh, let me start again. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the 7th in a series of Central Coast focused webinars designed to inform and inspire local clean energy development and resilience. This is the second webinar of 2 about electric cars. This one's titled Maximizing the Value of Electric Vehicles. It's the road ahead for EVs as part of the grid. So in previous webinars, we showed examples of microgrid projects. We explored how to address the question, and how to plan and finance microgrid projects on government facilities. This webinar is brought to you by Uniting the Central Coast for Action. We are a growing coalition working to create a resounding voice for climate leadership and resilience on the Central Coast. This is a sub-working group of the Slow Climate Coalition, which you'll see lots of logos of. The ring logo that you see is the Uniting the Central Coast logo. I'm Justin Bradshaw. I'm a member of the Slow Climate Coalition leadership team, and I'm an owner of 2 electric cars, and I have solar and Powerwall in my home. So I'm excited to be here. Today, we have a very exciting program for you with excellent speakers. This webinar will focus on what key California agencies are doing to overcome the regulatory and technical barriers to widespread implementation of V2X. We'll get into what that means. Representative from the California Public Utilities Commission, the CPUC, the California Energy Commission, the CEC, and Ford Motor Company will discuss what they are doing to advance this effort and how individuals, businesses, and government entities can and must play a role. We will then shift into questions and answers. We request that you enter your questions into the chat during the presentations. We will answer as many as we can after the speakers are done speaking, and we will address any remaining questions in writing. After that, we'll take a few minutes to get your feedback on the webinar and other ways we can work together to develop local clean energy and resilience. So before we jump into the program, I would like to thank all of our fantastic partner organizations that help make this webinar possible. We deeply appreciate your partnership and look forward to working together to accelerate climate leadership and resilience on the Central Coast. Those companies and organizations are all in the email that we sent out. Please take a look at them and patronize them as needed. It is now my pleasure to introduce Josh Huneycutt to talk about the CPUC, the California Public Utilities Commission, their perspective on V2X. Josh is a senior analyst at the California Public Utilities Commission, where he serves as the lead for vehicle-to-grid integration. Josh has also served as an energy advisor to the previous CPUC president and has managed various CPUC distributed energy resource programs. I love distributed energy resources, by the way. That's a big mouthful, but it's so great. Prior to joining the CPUC in 2017, Josh designed and led grant-funded programs for the U.S. Department of Energy's Solar Energy Technologies Office. He's also worked as an analyst for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration on climate and weather policy. He holds a master's degree from Columbia in energy policy. Thank you so much, Josh, for being here, and you are free to share your screen. I think you already are. No, that is our webinar screen. So, John, can we get the turn off that screen? And we're going to turn on Josh's as soon as we get the current one turned off.
Josh's is there.
Oh, that's Josh's. Great. Take it away, Josh. You look unmuted now.
All right, can y'all hear me now?
Yeah.
Excellent. Sorry, I had some technical difficulties this morning, so missed out on the tech demo here. Thanks, Justin, for the introduction and having me here today. Very excited to speak with you about what California's electric utilities are doing in the realm of vehicle-to-grid integration and V2X. So As Justin mentioned, my name is Josh Huneycutt. I'm a senior analyst on our transportation electrification team within our energy division at the CPUC. So what I'm saying here today on this presentation isn't a representation of what our commissioners think. This is me as an analyst and as a member of our energy division, which advises our commissioners. These are my opinions and assessments and analysis of the state of play. So just a quick disclaimer there. But I'm the lead for vehicle to grid integration, and happy to walk you through how we think about this topic, some opportunities for folks to participate in vehicle grid integration programs and activities, both currently and in the future, and talk a little bit more about what our strategy is going forward. And also happy to have be on the panel with some other folks who I know are doing some great things too. So we're going to hear a lot of interesting information today. So if I can advance the slide here. Just a quick busy slide here with a bunch of key terms and definitions. I know some folks like to look at the slides afterwards, so putting this all up here for your future reference. But as Justin mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about what VGI, V2X are. I know this is a webinar and a series of webinars, so potentially a lot of folks have already gone over these definitions. I will note that I think there are some broad definitions that we use that are generally agreed upon, but it's a pretty new and evolving space. So some people refer to some of these terms interchangeably, conflate them. It's okay. I think as long as we kind of understand some of the major differentiations here, we'll all be on the same page. So VGI, generally vehicle to grid integration, which covers pretty much everything you see on this page. V2X, that term, if you look down here in the bottom right corner, that covers the bi-directional component of vehicle to grid integration. So basically meaning that your vehicle's battery is exporting to the grid, very similar to distributed storage, just a battery hooked up to the grid, or to your home, or to another car. I'm sure many of you have seen that various automakers are rolling out vehicles. I believe our Ford colleague on the line here, his company is rolling out vehicles that come with a Tesla charger on board, so they can just charge another Tesla. So that's an example of V2X right there. So there's also V1G, which is within the realm of VGI. So that's unidirectional managed charging, similar to a demand response. There's no power injection to the grid there. And there's sort of passive and active forms of V1G and V2G. So, passive is where, this is mostly from the perspective of utility. Passive is going to be where, customer is making decisions on their own. They're not receiving control signals. Maybe you're responding to a time of use rate, you're going to charge off peak. Whereas active is more of a direct load control where a utility or third party is managing the vehicle charging on your behalf. All right, so with that out of the way, hopefully that's extremely clear. I just want to talk a little bit about how we approach VGI, V2X at the commission. This is something we've been thinking about a long time, but this was really codified into the course of doing business and everything we do on transportation electrification at the CPUC via a piece of legislation, state legislation in 2019, SB 676, which established a definition of VGI and laid out the types of things that we need to be encouraging the investor-owned utilities to do in their programs. And just for those who don't know, the California Public Utilities Commission, our job is to regulate the large investor-owned utilities in the state. So on the electric side, that's PG&E, that is Southern California Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric. So, we are in a partnership with them, you could say, and on some of these matters, sometimes more of a regulatory role, sometimes more of a partnership when we're developing and executing programs. And so our job is to ensure that the utilities are in all their transportation electrification programs thinking about vehicle to grid integration in this manner that's prescribed by the state legislature. And so that definition that utilities need to consider when they're developing transportation electrification programs, they need to be thinking about VGI in terms of any method of altering the time, charging level, or location at which grid-connected EVs charge or discharge in a manner that optimizes the interaction with the electrical grid and provides net benefits to ratepayers. So that's everyone on this call is a ratepayer. So we're trying to benefit you by increasing grid utilization and flexibility. So, basically making sure that vehicles are charging at times of low grid stress, avoiding infrastructure upgrades. If we can use the flexible charging capabilities of a vehicle to, for example, not strain a distribution circuit at a time of day where it's normally very taxed, put that charging in the middle of the night or a time where it's low stress, that can save customers money by avoiding, tens of thousands of dollars in upgrades. We're also trying to integrate renewables onto the grid. Right now, as I'm sure some of you know, during a couple days, months out of the year, we have to curtail our solar resource, and we don't want to do that. So how can we avoid that? We can potentially introduce dynamic rates that allow for signals for customers to charge at very low cost, high solar output, low energy cost times a day. And that ties into reducing supply costs. We also want to use vehicles to enhance reliability services and support resiliency. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So this slide here, just, I think we hear a lot about, VGI. I think people have a lot of ideas about, what vehicles can do, how they can participate in all the things that we just saw in the previous slide. And they get a sense that, well, this all seems very obvious that vehicles can and should be doing this. Why does it feel like I can't really do this right now? Why can't I, I have an EV, it might not be bi-directional. Some folks definitely have bi-directional capable EVs if you own a Leaf, if you own a Ford F-150 Lightning. So why am I not able to help support the grid, do all these things, take advantage of high solar output on the day, during the day? So that's a great question. We'll talk a little bit about that. Just to point out though, that a lot of these things actually are happening right now. So I know a lot of folks don't really consider time of use rates. So basically, most customers in California are now defaulted onto what we call time of use rates, which, vary your electricity price based on the time of day and based on the season. But that is, as we saw on that first slide with the definitions, that's absolutely a form of vehicle to grid integration where we can basically shift that charging load. And again, this is mostly on a passive basis, but this has a really big impact on our ability to successfully integrate EVs into the grid. So if you're taking part in a default time of use rate, or especially an EV time of use rate, you are both saving money, if you're charging according to off-peak hours, and you are contributing to VGI. This has a huge impact on the system. So, it's not the V2X, the kind of fun, nerdy stuff that I think we're all excited about unlocking here in the coming years. But this is super important that we, I think a lot of folks on this call are probably here because they, are aware of these issues and trying to find ways to help out. So, this is definitely, it's not the most exciting, but it certainly is VGI, and it certainly, makes a big impact in terms of integrating those EVs onto the grid. But we have lots of other stuff going on too. We've done experiments, we've done pilots with dynamic pricing. So BMW and PG&E work together to, provide day ahead real-time pricing to customers that they could respond to via apps. There's event-based demand response. So you may have heard during our recent, we'll talk a little bit more about this, during our recent grid emergency, folks responded across the state by participating in what we call the Emergency Load Reduction Program to get compensated for vehicle export and demand response. There are programs that you can work with your charging station or your charger provider to get some active demand management where you can earn money and save money by charging off peak. And I think we'll hear a little bit more about the potential for vehicle building, vehicle to home. Ford has been, I think, really an innovator in this and put this on the map as a capability that customers can have now that are excited about. And really, I think I can see this breaking up in the market for this particular form of V2X. And then again, the V2G, we are actively engaged in exporting vehicle-based energy to the grid and compensating customers for doing so. But these are all limited by program and to a large extent tech availability. I think this is the big thing that that doesn't get as much play, is that really there aren't a lot of vehicles on the market or out on the street. There's not a lot of, especially at the residential customer level, there's not a lot of, and I think actually maybe, aside from the Ford chargers, not many chargers are available that allow for bi-directional capability right now. So that's a huge issue towards unlocking this more broadly. But there are some things that are happening now in this space, and some things that are coming soon that folks on this call in PG&E territory are able to participate in. One that I'm going to highlight is the EV Pulse program. So this was funded through a state program that where the utilities receive credits for selling electricity as a fuel. And so basically what this does is allows you to sign up for with a third party, Weave Grid, to enroll in, if you're in a high fire threat district, you can enroll in a program where you will either get alerts about a coming public safety power shutoff in order to make sure that your vehicle's charged in case you need to evacuate. And then you can also activate smart charging controls, which would allow third-party Weave Grid to shift that charging. So there's an enrollment credit for this. This is an example of that, kind of active managed charging. And again, within that category of V1G. But coming soon, we, along with PG&E, are working to finalize some of the details on what we're calling our V2X Residential pilot. So this is focused on spurring adoption of V2X to your home, to the grid for 1,000 single-family residential customers with light-duty EVs by the end of next year. So customers who participate in this program, once it officially launches, and launch date we're shooting for the end of this year, will receive purchase incentives for the bi-directional capable chargers. Those customers can also participate in the emergency load reduction program, and we're working to pilot some export credits within this program that we hope to roll out to the broader PG&E customer base, and hopefully all the utilities in the next few years here. There's similar pilot going on for commercial customers. So if you have a small business, you have a charging fleet, and you want to participate in some vehicle to grid export, this is an opportunity to take part in that. And we're also working with PG&E on a vehicle to microgrid public safety power shutoff pilot, which will explore how EV customers in high fire threat districts can use their vehicles to provide backup services to critical facilities and other customers. All right, so real quick, I wanted to do a quick case study because I know this is probably on a lot of folks' mind. I know I saw a lot of press on around EVs and the recent heat wave. And, I'm sure if you're on this webinar, you're probably more of an EV enthusiast. So you probably saw some of these headlines and were like, hey, this doesn't sound right. I know that this isn't the messaging I was receiving, but it was, being interpreted in a way that can make it look like EVs are a net negative for the grid. So, we saw a lot of headlines that said, look at the irony here. We have California saying we're phasing out gasoline-powered cars, but now California is telling us not to charge those cars, which, it wasn't entirely true, right? Basically what grid operators were saying was, and same as what they're saying with through time use rates and through other demand signals is, if we can just hold off on the charging from that peak hour, this particular peak hour is really stressing the grid. We just need to shift that charging a little bit, and then everybody's scot-free. You just charge all you need during the evening, during the morning. That's not the messaging that made it to the mainstream press. And I think we saw some headlines that were a bit misleading and kind of made people think that maybe EVs weren't capable of providing, grid support, especially in times of extreme stress. So luckily, there was some counter programming on this that I think some really thoughtful articles, particularly from Axios and Wired, from kind of more publications that dug a little deeper, talked to some officials, got the full story, and went a little further and put forth the thesis that, which I think a lot of us on this call probably share, that EVs are in fact likely to be able to provide support to the grid in times of grid stress. But there's a lot of work to do for us to be able to get there. We'll say, I mentioned that we are doing some pilots with school buses in San Diego Gas and Electric territory. I know those vehicles were able to participate in the recent grid support emergency load reduction program. So we already have vehicles that are shifting the times that they're charging, that are exporting to the grid. The real big issue here is we need a lot more education around not only for the journalists on the left side of the screen, but for customers to really help them understand how they can participate, what this means on a bigger scale in terms of the future when we're transitioning to more renewables and more EVs. Again, I think we're kind of in this awkward spot where the technology is really incipient. It's right around the corner. We all know it's coming. We know our vehicles should or will be capable of this, and yet it's not quite there. So we need a little more education on when that technology is rolling out, helping customers automate these decisions, scale up, and then one thing we're really focused on the next few years here is coming up with ways that we can fairly compensate customers for either changing their time of charging or exporting to the grid. And so we have some proceedings underway, which are basically what we call our policy development cycles that will be looking at, and this is tied to the PG&E pilot that I mentioned a few slides back, that will be looking at how we can provide those levels of compensation that reflect grid conditions so that you can make money for doing the right thing during a grid emergency, or you can just get really cheap electricity for your EV during the day on a sunny spring day. So I haven't been timing myself. I feel I've probably blown past my time here. I did have a little bit more on CPU strategy. Happy to talk about that during the Q&A session. But John, does it seem about right to maybe wrap up with this for the moment?
The slide about what the PUC is doing or CPUC is doing, or
just talking a little bit about kind of what our strategic focus areas are for vehicle grid integration, but happy again to talk about that during the discussion session.
Why don't you just finish with that and then we'll move on, okay?
Sure, yeah, a few more slides. So I'll just run through, maybe this one would be helpful here. So a lot of words on this screen. This is kind of more for the policy wonks and nerds here. So, I talked a little bit about what we're trying to do to really kickstart this, the ability for customers to participate in VGI and V2X programs. It's been pretty limited to date, and there's a few key things that have been limiting that engagement. But we're really trying to unlock this in the next year here. Falls into three main categories: technology enablement, rates and markets, and then planning and coordination. So we're really focused in these three areas, and on a couple key things for the next few years here. So technology enablement, one big thing I'll highlight here, and if you kind of look to the desired end state, this is kind of my desired end state. I think this is happy to debate or discuss with others, but I think when it comes to technology, what we really want is for a customer to just be able to buy a car, come home, plug it in, maybe tinker with a few things on an app, and then not have to worry about whether or not they'll ever have a charge, and just basically start charging at the lowest possible rates and exporting to the grid, potentially, if that's something that meets their mobility needs, and making money for that. So what do we need to do to make that technology so there's basically plug and play? and then it can respond to rates that the utilities are offering to customers. One big thing that we just took care of is what we call submetering. So basically what this is it allows you to have a charger at your home or business and use that charger to measure the electricity that's going to the vehicle. So why is this a big deal? So we have EV specific rates for customers right now all across California. Some of you may be on these rates. The problem with these rates is that for the most part, unless you want to pay, up to $5,000 to have PG&E come to your house and, drill holes in the side of your home and install a separate utility meter, you probably are going to need to meter the EV load with the rest of the load from your house, which means that if you're, charging your car, or if you're, doing things that are adding to your load during a peak time, you're not going to be getting a very good deal, to be honest. So basically what we are unlocking with the submetering protocol is the ability to have those loads separately metered. So you'll be able to, keep a lower rate for your home and then get an even lower rate for your EV. And it'll be easy to differentiate that load. So this is actually going to unlock. It also puts in place a lot of different VGI, V2X communication protocols requirements for any publicly funded charger in the future. Is very aligned with what the CEC is doing as well on this. So basically this really puts in motion a lot of exciting things in terms of the 1G managed charging and then enabling V2X communications on the chargers. So there's a couple other things we need to take off the next year or so here, but that's a huge one. And I really think this is going to make a difference in terms of people's ability to capture low rates and to start getting involved in V2X programs. We're going to be doing a lot of work on rates and in order to, we talked a lot about some of these dynamic rate concepts where you could, again, charge your car during a time of high solar output for, a low cost during the middle of the day. And then we're doing a lot of planning coordination. Glad the CEC is on this call. We work together very closely. We're talking, bi-weekly. We work with them in a number of different fora, particularly around planning out the system. So this is, one of the trickiest things that I think you could imagine is trying to figure out the confluence of customer adoption of EVs, which we know is accelerating pretty rapidly, but then also trying to figure out how customers are going to use those EVs and whether or not they will be able to use them in a way that benefits the grid. And the implications for that are very large. We have very structured planning processes where we, CEC specifically, forecast out demand from all energy consumers for 10 years in the future. Historically, hasn't been, new generation technologies, new types of loads have come onto the system. The CEC's adapted to this, and based on those analyses, we take that information and we put forth an estimate of how much generation we'll need to support that, and the utilities go buy that generation, utilities and load serving entities. With vehicles, and especially with VGI, V2X, we're entering into a huge unknown here. Again, we don't have a lot of experience with V2X, but we know it's going to be a possibility, right? So we are really having to, in real time, we just had a meeting about this last week where we debuted some of our initial assumptions about how we should be thinking about the willingness and ability of customers to export to the grid in order to inform those, billion-dollar long-term procurement decisions for generation and transmission. So, getting this right is going to be really important. We're just now starting to get the technology. We're just now starting to put the rates in place. We're just now starting to and trying to model this as accurately as possible, with the hope that we can start to rely on customers and this technology to provide that grid support. But it's a huge unknown right now. Luckily, again, I think we have a lot of really smart folks focused on this. We're going to be working with stakeholders to refine and adjust our assumptions going forward. There's going to be a huge focus in the next few years is how do we understand, this very new technology and customers' response to it in the context of spending billions of dollars of your money on battery storage, on stationary battery storage. Are we going to be able to make that trade-off? I think to some extent the answer is yes, but we just need to get more data, more experience, and really figure that out. And that's absolutely what we're doing. We're spending a lot of time on this. I've spent a big portion of my year trying to put in place the process by which we can think about this more systematically. Because I think we all on this call, again, I think I've said this a few times, I think we all know that vehicles have a huge potential to really support the grid. But, how are customers going to be thinking about this? Are we going to be able to incentivize that behavior effectively? What are the educational behavioral strategies we'll need to put in place to get people to help out when we need the help? How firm, how reliable will that resource be? Is it as reliable as, a big battery, sitting next to a power plant somewhere? We don't know yet. So, but we're thinking about it. It's a topic of conversation and something I'm happy to discuss more. So I think with that, I'll wrap it up. I know I've been talking for a while, so that's about it for now.
Wow, thank you, Josh. That was great. So many good pieces of information and things that the CPUC has top of mind, which is exciting to hear. Okay, so everybody get your questions in. I'm sure there's tons of, I know I have several questions for Josh, but I think some of them might get answered as we move on in the webinar. So let's just put those questions in the chat. Barry is combining them and curating them a bit so we can be efficient with our time on that. So next up is Kiel Pratt. This is about climbing the V2X Mountain, the path to resilience, cost savings, and convenience at scale. Important part of this. Kiel supervises the Vehicle Grid Integration Unit within the California Energy Commission, the CEC, the Fuels and Transportation Division. This team supports the Clean Transportation Program, leads the stakeholder-focused activities, including funding and policies to support EVs as flexible grid resources that continue. I just spotlighted myself here, and that continue to. I lost my spot. Sorry. It's about. He was previously part of the CEC's research team and development division. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in math and a minor in music from Cal Poly, at San Luis Obispo. All right, thanks, Kiel. I'm about to spotlight you, and have you gotten your, let's see here. I'm gonna get you on the screen share and spotlight you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Can I confirm you can hear me?
Yes.
All right, awesome. Yes, my name is Kiel Pratt. I supervise the Vehicle Grid Integration Unit as part of the California Energy Commission's Fuels and Transportation Division. And as you heard, I went to Cal Poly, and I wish you a happy National Drive Electric Week. Now I'll activate my slides. All right, did I do it?
Looks good.
You see him? Great. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me and you for listening to this webinar, whether right now or in the future. And it's interesting to think about viewing this in the future, a few years beyond 2022, because while the place we are aiming for will stay consistent over the coming decades, and we're aiming for an economy, built environment, power and transportation system, all of it, that protects the health and prosperity of people and the environment. That is a 100% clean energy economy that leaves no one behind. That's the goal. And while it will remain in front of us for a while, of all the factors supporting our movement there, I think V2X is the fastest moving and in certain ways the most interesting. What I'm trying to say is this stuff will be out of date really soon. No, not everything. I'm trying to change slide. So not everything, not the definitions or frameworks you've seen, but more what you will see around you as these products are adopted. And as far as frameworks, this slide shows bidirectional charging in the context of vehicle grid integration, or VGI, more generally, which, as you know, also includes one-way charging that's flexible. All the points here can apply to bidirectional charging, and the green indicates exclusively bidirectional. I suspect what we are talking about today, electric vehicles, including trucks and more, that can discharge some of the fairly enormous amount of energy in their batteries, that is vehicle to everything, power takeoff for work tools, resilient backup power, vehicle to grid, right now is at the sharpest tip of a huge wedge of customer interest and adoption. And the market will look different in a few years, I think, with more volume and customer familiarity. Because the value of what an electric vehicle can be is so amplified by having bidirectional access to the stored energy, much different than fossil fuels. Electrical energy that translates directly to the use of camping equipment, work tools, the ability in an outage to power your home for days at a time, or to earn or save money each month on your electric bill by helping address the duck curve during times when energy storage is the most valuable. This is what a car can be. People are not used to that. They're not used to cars, trucks, and more with such ready access to power. Fossil fuels cannot provide this. It's inefficient to run a big engine for a very small load and a long time period, or for short bursts of power. But batteries have this flexibility. People will come to expect more from vehicles. But it's still a journey to get there, and this presentation is about the Energy Commission's role in some milestones on that journey. I used a mountain in the title as a metaphor for the sustained and trailblazing effort to implement V2X. It started years ago, and with recent announcements such as by Ford, who you'll hear from soon, we are climbing faster toward these benefits at scale. More resilient transportation and buildings, a more economical power grid, and a convenient experience for everyone. I'm very happy you were able to hear Josh Huneycutt from the California Public Utilities Commission present before me. Items like the V2X pilots in PG&E territory he covered are very important. And at the Energy Commission, CEC, we have been speaking with utilities and industry partners on how to best make them and similar efforts successful and build a strong market. The CEC works hand in hand in public processes and directly and frequently with other key energy agencies, including the CPUC, California ISO, and Air Resources Board. The goal of regulators, utilities, and others involved in the electric grid is to ensure safe, reliable electricity at reasonable rates with a commitment to equity, environmental protection, and a healthy economy. In that context, we're working to secure 100% clean and reliable energy for all. Now, you've heard about the diversity of messaging in the media, especially during the recent heat wave. Josh gave a great overview, and I'll add a bit more about the Energy Commission's role. Part of our work includes long-term electricity supply and demand analysis in coordination with the public and many other stakeholders. This work considers active and potential new regulations. So here are more interagency connections. For example, the Air Resources Board recently adopted a 100% zero-emission vehicle requirement for new sales in 2035 and is considering the Advanced Clean Fleets rule. The Energy Commission annually conducts energy forecasts to ensure we plan for enough power in the future, including from the likely growth of EVs due to these policies. The goal of these forecasts is to help secure enough electricity plus a comfortable reserve margin over the years to help the grid deliver power where it needs to go. And you heard recently on the CPUC's side, last week their Integrated Resources Planning team held a public meeting that debuted analysis of using V2G as a resource for planning, as Josh covered. Here's a quick taxonomy of the CEC's main functions. The long-term supply and demand analysis I mentioned is led by our Energy Assessments Division. And then my Fuels and Transportation Division also has a role modeling the EV charging network California will need in 2030 and beyond. This work is under Assembly Bill 2127, which I'll talk about later. Additionally, our division provides funding for zero emission infrastructure and several types of market investments to support it, such as block grants for charging infrastructure and manufacturing, and even support for laboratory certification and interoperability testing of new charging equipment. That's hugely important for V2X. And that's through our Clean Transportation Program. Then zooming out again, our Research and Development Division invests in energy innovation through the Electric Program Investment Charge, or EPIC program. We work closely with them on strategy and on supporting promising technologies through the commercialization stage. Other parts of the CEC that my division works with are responsible for building decarbonization, which is also influenced by electric vehicles and V2X. So that's a connection. There's a lot of collaboration going on. And before I go to the V2X collaboration, I invite you to collaborate with us. There are many opportunities for public comments and participating in our workshops, but I'm also talking about joining the CEC, because with the work to be done and the historic budget investments we've been entrusted with, we need more people who are committed to these goals as team members. And now for the Vehicle to Everything collaboration. You might have heard of it, a large memorandum of understanding led by the US Department of Energy and signed by over 20 large entities earlier this year. Every presenter today represents an organization that has signed the MOU. What does it mean? It's not a contract. It doesn't have a strictly defined scope, budget, or schedule, but it's a tangible, visible statement by industry, government, academia, labor, and other organizations on the importance and growth of V2X. It's a sign that enough of these players are enthusiastic and organized and ready to work together. It'll be the basis for new conversations and justifying investments across these organizations. I've seen the impact of MOUs on decision processes in my organization in the past. It's a big deal. Oops, there we go. Now I want to go into some detail on technology deployment, analysis, and market support. Considering those topics, the organizers asked me to comment on aspects of the last edition of this webinar, which I encourage you to see. I want to give massive praise to the presenters. For example, my slides are not going to approach that awesomeness. From Nuvi, an animated fleet state of charge and ancillary services dashboard that Paige Nolan presented. For a system to orchestrate that bi-directional charge activity reliably and smoothly and give that visibility, it's impressive and shows the maturity of the technology. And Paige presented interesting points on the market differences between Europe and North America. And from UCSD, incredible data collection from their energy resources on campus. I like how Jan Kleisel tied it together with how well various driver itineraries, different commuter types, fleets, match up with the possibility of flexible charging. Sometimes you need full power the whole time you're plugged in. Sometimes you have a lot more flexibility, and often, for the right price, you can discharge some of your car's energy and still be fully secure in your travel needs. Travel needs, the security of your mobility, is what I want to talk about with respect to the last presentation in part 1 of this webinar. Representing the Center for Community Energy, Jose Torre Bueno, who I'm pleased to see is in the audience today, walked through several aspects of EV charging and grid planning and used, to great effect, some charts from the Energy Commission's Assembly Bill 2127 work. He pointed out that overnight charging, while less expensive than peak time charging, still does not use the greenest electricity. Indeed, at nighttime, the grid has more extra capacity, so prices are cheaper, but until we get more wind and storage, that energy is not as green as you can get midday with solar. So one call to action in this presentation was advocating for local charging of cars by solar and against large utility investments. Quote, if you want cars charged during the day, put solar collectors where the cars are. The idea is cars will carry the charge to drivers' homes and discharge in the early evening to help with the duck curve. I did research, and first of all, I would say maximize this wherever possible. Overhead solar panels in parking lots, just so many advantages. More money stays local with the site owner. Folks who cannot charge at home have this charging opportunity. And it's nicer to park under a shade structure. These carports can help with the urban heat island effect. And there's more freedom to have solar panels even face west and help more with the duck curve. But the presentation had statements like, it eliminates the need to upgrade the grid. And the organization's website has a paper called V2X as a solution to the duck curve. And in its conclusion is a statement, we contend that far from requiring expensive grid upgrades, transportation electrification can be done in a way that benefits the grid at no cost to ratepayers. Now, the presentation's final call to action was about NEM3, net energy metering, on which I'm no expert and won't comment in detail. Suffice to say, it's one mechanism for utility revenue and investment, and it affects the economics of behind-the-meter solar. No matter the resolution, and even assuming strong incentives for local solar, can transportation electrification really be done at no cost to ratepayers? I don't see how that can be supported, knowing what we do about travel needs. Perhaps the strongest points, let's look beyond light duty. There are fleets of buses and trucks that in many cases don't have room at their facilities for enough solar panels to satisfy their much larger energy needs. The concept might satisfy the needs of most individual drivers who commute or who work from home, so their car is a quasi-stationary battery. But you can't assume that solar and home charging alone will satisfy everyone's travel needs, even for light duty, even if you assume large batteries with no further grid investment. We can't say everyone's mobility is secure and assured that way. From the framework of modeling that national lab contractors and staff did under AB 2127, and how travel survey data and updated range assumptions and other stakeholder input are applied to modeling charging behavior, it was clear that we need different charging modalities to serve all drivers. And it's not two extremes of solar charging or utility investments. We need both, including abundant local solar. And zooming out, an economy-wide clean energy transition, largely electrification, that leaves no one behind, is going to need some sustained investment in generation, transmission, and distribution. I mean, look at building electrification as well. Now, granting that considering transportation electrification separately is hard, still, the statements that it can be done at no cost to ratepayers are hard to support, again, especially looking beyond light duty. Now, I mentioned different charging modalities, and here's an example of one project that was awarded last year by the Clean Transportation Program. Industry is coming up with emerging technologies that bolster the use of solar and can deliver charging in certain corner cases, otherwise difficult settings. And just 2 weeks ago, another team from our Fuels and Transportation Division presented concepts for a V2X school bus charging infrastructure solicitation. That's an application where solar works very well. And in fact, solar is planned to be a reimbursable cost. And look at this. I told the organizers I'd go light on the acronyms and jargon, but look what I've done. And this is for the same school bus concept. Why all this? Well, all these acronyms and standards and supplements help guide equipment selection and are integral to growing a market that promises interoperability, convenience, and customer choice. When we implement public funding, we want the equipment to be as future-proof as possible and not lock customers into specific vendors. That's why we developed a nuanced definition of hardware ready for 1511.8, for example. I won't describe all these here, but I'm happy to answer questions. My point is that these proposed requirements for funding awards are the result of careful analysis and sustained coordination among our teams and with industry and other stakeholders. I want to begin to close with a list of efforts the CEC has undertaken in the past year or so for V2X. What you see on the screen here are all workshops. Some are for funding opportunities, past or present, and some are for standalone projects. I'll let the slide speak for itself and note these efforts are distinct but interconnected, and I'm happy to answer questions on any of these that grab your attention. And you can go to our website or Google and look up these workshop titles and dates. Our web pages have agendas, presentation slides, and often recordings. So they are useful information hubs. And they often link to our public dockets, where you can see comments written by others and create your own. Finally, I'll leave you with this, posing a vision staff presented in July in reference to vehicle grid integration generally, but it certainly holds for V2X. Cost, choice, and convenience are what we'll keep in our focus in the coming years, in this trailblazing, metaphorical climb up the mountain, if you remember the title. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Kyle. That was a lot of great information too. It's my reaction is how I'm sort of confused about the difference between all these California, entities, but I'm excited that that you guys are all thinking about this problem and working together on it and presenting to us because we're very excited about it. Okay. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Jacob Mathews to discuss Ford's approach to V2G integration. I'm going to remove Kyle's spotlight. Thank you, Kyle, so much. And so Jacob, let's see, where are you, Jacob? There we go. Spotlighting Jacob. Oh, nice background there, Jacob. Jacob is the manager of EV standards, regulations, and policy at Ford Motor Company. In his role, Jacob interfaces with external organizations, agencies, utilities, and policymakers to help shape regulations, standards, and policies for EV infrastructure and EV adoption. He currently serves on the board of CharNA Inc. to help promote adoption of consistent EV charging standards across North America. Jacob has over 25 years experience in product development, launching various product lines. He's a recipient of over 35 US patents, many in EV technologies. Jacob holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical Engineering from Temple University, Master of Science degree in Electrical and Computer Controls Engineering from Wayne State University. Welcome, Jacob.
Thank you, Justin. And yeah, thank you, John and Barry, for inviting me to speak at this webinar. Let me share my screen. Hopefully you can see this now.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So I wanted to first begin by just giving a quick introduction about what we are doing at Ford. And actually, I've been engaged in electrification projects and programs over 2 decades. I remember our very first EV Ranger that was made with lead acid batteries and later with nickel metal hydride batteries that we produced and delivered in Southern California for the utility there. And it was only 60 miles, and it's a long ways that we have come with our new F-150 with over 300 miles. So it's been quite a journey, and over the past several decades, I've done lots of EV related projects and programs along with mainstream programs like the F-150. So I'll just talk a little bit about what our company is doing. At Ford, we're fully committed to leading the electrification, and that is to say truthfully, it's our company and our industry is going through a major sea change, and we're building the future for zero emission transportation, and we expect to produce over 2 million EVs annually by 2026, and more than half of our production is by 2030 we think is going to be EV vehicles. As I said, 50 billion investment to 2026. We've got battery plants that are going up in Kentucky and Tennessee, new campuses going in place. You've all seen our F-150 truck that we have recently launched with lots of capabilities. And we're investing about $90 million in Texas, a total of $525 million in US to train our skilled electricians to service these connected electric vehicles. So there's a lot of investment that we're putting forward. And of course, we have our, with partnership through other companies. We have now what we call the Blue Oval Charge Network, which is one of the largest public charging network with over 70,000 plugs and growing every day. We fully understand that if we don't have the infrastructure in place, then that is going to be an impediment and a hindrance for adoption. So, we have done a lot of work to try to get infrastructure. And so we are actively engaged, and we really value our partnership with the CEC and the CPUC and helping to comment on some of the seminars and activities that Kyle pointed out. We participated in those and happy to do so because we want to have that partnership going forward. Anyway, that's a bit about the company and our thought process there. So what's our approach to vehicle to grid integration? I think VGI, has already been pointed out by the two fine presenters earlier. It's going to be a crucial element in adoption of EVs, and we have to have the value that's being created again for providing grid resource to utilities and allowing EV drivers to earn incentives, helping to lower the total cost of ownership. And again, value streams that will streams for equity-based programs. I mean, all these things will be important for EV adoption. We've also done, we talked about, Josh talked about the VGI, and one of the things we have done is what we call open vehicle grid integration platform. And this was our first approach of trying to aggregate vehicles that we have in any utility territory and being able to provide, take grid signals and helping to respond to them by either delaying charges, vehicle charging, or in case of California, there's lots of solar available during the day. Then promoting vehicle charging, whether it's at home or in a workplace, but being able to connect all our vehicles. And we call that platform open vehicle grid integration platform. Connecting the utilities with our back end and controlling the vehicles, of course, with the customer's consent and their agreement, to be able to optimize the charging and save up all those green electrons when they're available, if you will. Just jumping through, our primary focus has been to leverage, like I said, the embedded communications and controls in EVs. And EVs, of course, with all technology that's built into it, we're able to do that in a very cost-effective manner. And so that's been our first phase. Our next phase we get into is vehicle to home, vehicle to building, and vehicle to grid, which we'll talk more about today. So our system, going to my next slide here. This is just another cartoon of our overall system. Just kind of shows you I have more slides and we'll talk more about it. But essentially, we've got a utility connection going to what we call our home integration kit, which can take input either from the vehicle or from the solar panel, or it could be a battery, storage battery that's in the home as well. It communicates through a wall box that we provide, which then helps connect the vehicle in either charging or discharging. And let me get in more details. I know you may have already seen this, but just to highlight again. So our home Ford Intelligent home backup system that we have essentially acts as a standby generator. It can power the home up to 9.6 kilowatts via a 80 amp Ford charge station. And then, of course, the same system can discharge about 9.6 kilowatts going back the other direction into the home. And the truck will, if it's fully charged, it will wake up, connect, and be able to discharge to the home in an isolated manner. And once the power is restored, it flips and starts charging the truck back again. So it's really seamless system that allows the ability for the home to be online even in case of a PSPS event that might take place. A little bit more about the system, just for those online, or just to talk about it a bit more. So as I was telling you, that at the heart of it is our Ford Charging Pro Station, which is a bi-directional device. Of course, it can take in about 19.2 kilowatts power coming in. And then, of course, it discharges about 10 kilowatts. Now, our discharge is in the DC format. It's not AC. So we have, as shown in this picture, we have this inverter. It's with a partnership with our company called Sunrun. They are our preferred installer at this point. And the inverter then that they have will actually connect. It will go through a transfer switch to isolate the home, and then it would provide critical loads back to the the home, the building, wherever the system has been installed. And so you can see that we're importing in AC but exporting in DC. And part of the reason for doing that is that we obviously saw the need that consumers will need this kind of a feature early on, and part of the challenge was that the standards that are needed to make it operate in a more seamless fashion was not quite available. Kyle talked about 1518-20. That was just introduced, but it'll take some time to actually fully implement that, and so we didn't want to wait 3-4 years before that system was fully online to be able to bring that to market. So we have our own system at the moment. Eventually, I think we will integrate that 1518-20 functionality and be able to further cost reduce our systems, if you will. But that's sort of how our system works. And then, of course, the Sunrun inverter that I talked about, because Sunrun is able to provide solar as well as storage. A customer could have solar panels connected to that inverter, or another storage backup battery connected, a power wall of sorts connected to that, and then, of course, the vehicle. So you have the opportunity to save that solar energy into a storage and use that for home use, and of course the vehicle as well for that purpose. Next, I wanted to just get into some of the barriers that we see for VGI. What are some of the challenges that are presently there? So first thing we want to do is we want to talk about getting the basics right. And by that, I mean, having the infrastructure in place. We have to make sure that there's lots of make-ready installations going in place for multi-unit dwelling and for low-income and disadvantaged communities, workplaces, etc. So EVs cannot help the grid unless they are plugged in. So we've got to make sure the infrastructure is there, where the customer has the ability to plug the vehicle in to be able to take advantage of that. I touched upon the fact that 1518-20 was not available at the time that we were designing this. So clearly communication standards need to promote interoperability. So in the end, the consumer doesn't have to, if they go to a different OEM, they don't have to, or should not have to, change their inverter or change the hardware that they have they should be able to get any vehicle they want, and they should all work in a similar fashion. And I think that's the future. That's where we're headed. But we have to make sure that the interoperability is there. And I thank the CEC for the work they're doing. With the interoperability testing symposium they're setting up, and the visual program to again help to make sure that there is that connectivity or communication that's interoperable with vehicle and various other EVSEs and other devices. That's key, and I applaud them for having done that. It's having taken that step, because that's really what's necessary to build the confidence for the consumer that if they buy product A, it's going to work with a different product, a different company's product down the road. They're not tied to one particular. I would love them to just buy Ford, but that would not be the best interest for the consumer to make it open for anybody to be able to operate. And of course, then the consumer education and them understanding the benefit of EVs, that's quite important as well. And then, of course, the lack of EV-specific rate structure. And I appreciate, CPUC and the work they're doing and helping you define that. We talked about sub-metering, and that's really important. I mean, clearly, to take advantage of time of use rates that are beneficial for the consumer, they should not be asked to install a second meter. And so, while sub-metering can occur in an EVSE, we see that the sub-metering is already available to the EV itself. So further lowering the cost, not having to have that extra capability built into the EVSE. What if, we had an old device, it was a simple CCS connection, did not have that capability. But if the EV is able to tell the utility exactly how much energy was consumed within small percentage of the actual metering requirements, then I think that's an opportunity that, and we're discussing this with CEC further, as far as opportunities to open that sub-metering protocol up for EVs to report as well. And again, lowering the threshold for consumers so they can adapt more readily without having to have more expensive equipment in place. Then, of course, the V2X regulatory issues for the consumers and the grid. And by that, I mean permitting and interconnection. You are fortunate in California with Rule 21 and its openness to adopt EVs. I happen to deal with the rest of the country, and it's not quite so. And so, from a larger perspective, we need to have easier permitting and easier interconnection, more simplified and streamlined process for all consumers, not just in California, but obviously, across the US, so we can have more adoption. Each utility has their own particular, and each CPUC or PUC, I should say, would have its own way of managing it. And so we're on a crusade to sort of help them understand these roadblocks and to help alleviate this as we go down the path. We talked about rates and incentives. Again, if EVs are going to perform a grid resource, then there's got to be an appropriate rates and incentives given to the consumer. I'll just jump down to the last point. You heard Kyle talk about the Air Resource Board recently passing ACC2. In ACC2, there is a requirement for battery durability. So we as OEMs have to make sure that the battery, we not only provide the warranty for 8 years, 100,000 miles, but we also have to provide battery durability. And that is a scale that actually goes up in outer years. But what that means is that we have to protect the use of the battery and protect the battery so that it does last as long as the Air Resource Board wants it to. And for the consumer, so for second, third, fourth use of the EVs, we want to be able to provide them a reliable product. But if the first and second user is going to do a lot of V2G, then that's going to degrade the battery life. And while we do want to offer that, is the incentive for using the battery, is that commensurate with the battery degradation that is taking place. So, these batteries will degrade as you use them, and whether the energy is being used to spin the wheels or turn up the air conditioning or heating or lighting in a home, the battery doesn't know the difference. It's still energy that's coming out, and over time that adds up to mileage, if you will. And so we have to sort of figure that out to see what would be the sweet point and what type of reimbursement the consumer can get so as to compensate for that. So there's now obviously we're offering this feature on our vehicle, and but it's not, we don't consider the intelligent backup power to be used every day. It's when you have a PSPS event, which is not every day, but hopefully not every day in the summer, but it's not as frequent. So that's a small hiccup, if you will, and that's something that can be absorbed. But if it's being utilized every single day, then that will add up to mileage, which we'll have to do better accounting for. So those are some of the challenges we're dealing with and that we have to grapple with as we go forward. So again, these are things that we have to work through, and we're happy to be on this journey and providing this vehicle with this capability. And clearly, as we learn more and as the consumers recognize the benefit of EVs, and there are proper incentives in place to compensate the use of EVs as a grid resource, I think it's going to be a win for everybody. And I think over time it will definitely help us as a society in helping to curtail all the emissions that we are trying to avoid. So I think with that, I would like to just pass it back to you. I think that's my last slide, I think. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you and for listening to me, and happy to take any questions you might have. So thank you. Justin, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. I think we're all very excited about what the potential for the F-150 is, and the fact that Ford is very all in on electrification. At least that's what we hear from you, and we know that it's a there was a little bitty thing on the first slide of Ford wants, your division at least wants to disrupt itself or disrupt the own company, and that's very hard to do.
It is very hard, yeah.
And so actually I have before we get to Barry's questions, which he's working on, I have a question, which there's been a lot of chatter in the talk, and I actually own a Tesla, a Chevrolet Bolt, and a Tesla Powerwall, and have solar. So I have experienced the beauty of the Tesla virtual power plant. And when we had the heat wave recently, I was discharging my Powerwall into the grid during these peak moments and helping the grid cope. And we talked a lot about the grid, and the F-150 obviously has a great vehicle to home integration. But I think the interest for this webinar is really about that vehicle to grid and what you guys have planned for that. So, I know Tesla has the VPP, virtual power plant, and basically that is essentially, it is Tesla organizing its fleet with its own software of, in this case, fleet of Powerwalls, but hopefully one day cars, and organizing the fleet with the app that they provide and with the agreements that they interact with their customers. So this is an opportunity for Ford to say, okay, we have our app, we have our vehicles, we have our bi-directional capability already. Can we take that to the next level and have an agreement with the utility where we're going to sell power for that is from our customers' cars that we are going to package and then sell to Cal ISO, right? Is that something that you guys are planning on doing here with the F-150? And side question, I understand the Mustang is not dual directional capable yet.
It isn't, but it's a software update and it can also be as well. Yes.
Okay, so the F-150 and one day the Mustang has this potential. Where are you guys in this world of getting there? I know it's multi-state question. Let's just talk California for right now.
Yeah, so I think we look at the customer usage and of course the amount of battery that we have packed in that vehicle. So the F-150 obviously has a much larger battery, and we're able to do, that's therefore we have the Pro Power on board where you can plug in different devices. And somebody said, you can also charge another vehicle. If you had an EVSE plugged in, you can charge from the vehicle itself. So because there is a bigger battery available, we're able to do some of that. And there's obviously the consumer's range anxiety, right? So on a Mustang, it's a smaller battery. If we were to use some of that, how will that impact the operation? And so it will become available there as well. I think all our vehicles will eventually have that. I talked, let me just talk about our E-Transit. I mean, it has a smaller battery for the very purpose that, the E-Transits are a commercial vehicle. They have they go to a depot, they're able to run their operation for the day, come back fully charged. And so depending upon the size of the battery and what is available, we should be able to, make that. So I know I'm sort of not answering your question directly, but that's kind of where we're headed with that. Be an optimization of, what the customer wants, what's available, and how much of that can be used for other purposes.
Right, and I'm sure it'll be related to what the compensation is, and like you said, how much degradation does that cause, and is it going to be worth it to the customer? I guess the crux of the question that I didn't make very clear is, that needs to happen, obviously, big picture. Is that going to be a thing that Ford provides as a service to the grid, or is it something with the these standards that are being developed? Are they going to create? Is there going to be some other entity that a Ford customer can sign up with to become part of their vehicle to grid power? Or is Ford going to say, you know what, we want to do what Tesla does and we want to be the power plant?
So here's the challenge with that is that, as I said earlier, the battery has a finite life. And so if we simply open it up for anybody to use the way they want to use it, we're not going to be able to meet the battery warranty requirement that we have signed up for the customer. We're saying to not only the customer, but also to Air Resource Board, we are going to warrant this battery for 8 years, 100,000 miles. If it's opened up for any third party to start using the battery as which they want, I think there would have to be other controls put in place to make sure that we don't violate the battery warranty, because it'd be the last thing we want to do is, because consumer, for the first customer or the same customer, enjoys a lot of V2G first 3 years, it comes back and says, my battery is all spent, and we're like, how did that happen?
So what I hear you saying is that Ford does need to be in charge of that relationship, because it's in charge of the warranty. And if that is going to happen, it's going to happen as a Ford program.
Yes.
Okay. But you're not sure if that's going to happen, or at least not.
Well, I think we talked about, I mentioned in one of the slides, the grid, OVGIP, the Open Vehicle Grid Integration Platform. And that's and that's doing V1G, but that's just not Ford. It's also GM and, 3-4 other OEMs put together that are making this kind of an effort. But the idea
the software layer, right? That's the layer of software that,
right.
Yeah, cool.
Where, the vehicle is under some contract or agreement with, with the OEM, and then the OEM in turn is aggregating all the vehicles together and saying, PG&E, in your territory, we presently have, 1,000 customers that have signed up for curtailing charging during certain events, and we will deliver this megawatt, whatever it is, as an aggregation.
Right. Ford becomes.
So that's already part of that, and the next step would be to take it to V2G. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Great. I'm going to bring in Barry here. He's now spotlighted. Hi, Barry. And I take it you are ready to start asking some questions from the group.
Yeah, we've got all kinds of questions in the chat. I'll get right to them here. See how many we can get to.
I've spotlighted all our panelists.
Yeah, so Alex was really active in the chat. He represents a public agency, and they're doing some significant investment in DC or in level 2 charging stations. And so he wants to know, is V2G strictly limited to DCFC charging, or is there coming options in level 2 chargers? And more importantly, how can we future-proof what we are doing now? How can we make sure that the level 2 chargers that we put in are going to be future-proof for eventually handling V2G at the level 2 AC charging level?
I can take a stab at that. So our vehicle today, F-150, has Pro Power on board, which is exporting AC power. The challenge we get into is when we take that AC power and connect that to the premises. Now our devices, our inverters, our chargers have to be utility grades and certified with a NRTL. So the industry has actually been working in conjunction with UL and others to and SAE to write specifications that would mirror what a utility grade certification would be. And so once that has been accomplished, I think we'll be able to. There are still some challenges. There's still some challenges for isolation and safety that need to be addressed completely. But at least there is a framework. So just for some background, so automotive industry has been with NHTSA are doing what's called self-certification. We work with, SAE is the organization and others that write standards. We check our product to a certain standard. We say, we are certifying that we meet this particular requirement. If there's an issue in the field, then NHTSA will come back and say, automakers, what did you do here? We provide proof data that our testing was done for the standard, and that we had a due diligence. In case of the utility industry, is not so much so. They require that the devices have to be third-party tested. So imagine this complication for the automotive industry, where you have a device that now provides power in AC format, but it now has to be certified by a third party. So all this time we've been beholden to self-certification. Now we have to go take our vehicle or our component to a third party and wait for them to approve. There's going to be a big log jam for the testing site to be able to get all that cleared up. So, and it's not the way that we have operated. So thankfully, UL is now writing a new standard specification that allows for a bit of a deviation in that, I understand. So long term, I think we're going to get there. There are still some technical challenges that have to be resolved with ground fault safety and such. But as I said, on our F-150, we have a charger that takes AC, converts to DC, and then we have a Pro Power on board where you can plug in your devices for tailgating or camping, and that takes DC back to AC. So who's to say you can't combine those two and say, all right, here's AC back to the house. But now we have violated for the electrical code, the fire protection code, and we have violated UL code. So we're working through that. And I think in the future we'll have that, but not quite there yet.
Yeah, I'm not sure that answers directly Alex's question, but we really need to get on to some of these other questions. One of the questions I think for the CPUC, either Josh or Kyle, for these, I believe it was Josh described the V2X pilots, and they talked about the residential participation. Do you know if the vehicle charging, the EVSE, would be, the vehicle charger would actually be paid for by the pilot project for the residential consumer? How is it going to involve residential consumers? Do they get a charger out of that pilot study?
The answer is sort of. So that participation incentive is intended to offset the cost of the charger. Right now, again, the pilot has not launched yet, so we haven't finalized all the specifics. But yeah, the intention is for that to offset a portion of the increased cost of a bidirectional charger. So, and just to kind of get back to the question of whether bidirectional capable chargers are either fast chargers, level 3 DC fast chargers, or level 2. There are both. So, they are in various configurations. The one coming onto the market, and I think Jacob was talking to this a little bit. Right now the preferred and approved interconnection pathway is on the DC side. So the ones coming to market on the level 2 side will be mostly DC, but that as these standard issues are worked through, expect to potentially see more on the AC side as well.
Okay, thank you. Here's a longer question. Does the CPUC consider VGI a preferred outcome or as an imperative? If the latter, is the CPUC forcefully advocating for mandatory bidirectionality of all EVs and EVSE? Also, a high DER future based primarily on solar will require daytime charging at the workplace and public parking lots. How will the CPUC incentivize workplace charging? And I think CEC might have a word with that about incentives.
Yeah, that's a complex set of questions. So, as the utility regulators, we do not mandate vehicle standards, right? So we're not gonna tell auto manufacturers what to do, in terms of whether or not the emission standards are being met on vehicles. That's CARB's duty. What we can do is offer incentives for customers to use their vehicles in a way that benefits the grid. So I mentioned that we're working on developing rates that would allow for customers to charge at off-peak times of the day, receive really good rates for that, and potentially export to the grid. So the way we look at that now is, again, this is a complex equation where we need to really understand consumer behavior. A lot of these technologies are just rolling out now. And again, I think this is something, for us energy enthusiasts that sometimes gets a little lost, is that, the vehicles are first and foremost vehicles, right? People purchase these vehicles to get around, to run their errands, to be there in the case of emergency. And so I think a lot of folks, especially new to the EV world, aren't coming into this thinking about, how can I, flip the switch and basically run a generator that helps, get PG&E off the hook or support their grid operations. Like that's probably just not on the mind of most consumers. And they're probably thinking, and as someone who purchased the EV this year, they're thinking more about, is my vehicle going to be charged when I need it to get me to the place I need? So I think there's a big kind of gap between us, getting consumers to the point where they're just comfortable having an EV in general. They're comfortable responding to a time of use price signal, understanding what it means to be peak and off peak, to the point where we're saying you must have a bidirectional capable EV or EVSE and use it in the times that are needed. I think bidirectionality, and again, I don't speak for the commission, it's going to be a pretty key piece of the puzzle in the next 10 years here, once the technology is widely available and customers understand it a bit more. But I think we need to be really sensitive to the needs of drivers the longevity of the vehicle batteries that Jacob touched on a little bit. And really dialing that in is going to be I think a process of education, and really working together to understand how grid needs are reflected in those rates, and having the industry respond in kind with product offerings and services that build upon those rates, because they're really the ones that are interacting with their customers, and they have trusted relationships with their customers. There's a lot more loyalty amongst Ford owners than PG&E customers, right? So I think there's a lot of learning, a lot of education we need to do, but there could be a point in the future where it is. Right now, again, it's very difficult to go out and buy a bi-directional charger. So I think we're a long way from having that discussion around mandatory, bi-directionality, et cetera. But, who knows what the future will hold.
And speaking of incentives, I think, Kyle, can you answer that question about, is there a possibility that there would be a whole new incentive for extra incentive amount for consumers to buy vehicles that are bi-directional capable?
There are possibilities, and as far as incentives, there are many different flavors. Let me say a few. The Clean Transportation Program support for EVs is mostly in the form of infrastructure. So we've issued specific solicitations that would result in grant-funded projects to demonstrate early stage technology or deploy charging in areas that are conventionally hard to reach by the conventional market, such as rural areas, multi-family dwellings, and other places where so far today it's been expensive or otherwise difficult to put in charging. So that's what this solicitation funding assistance is for. There are also block grants that the CEC issues. You might have heard energized commercial vehicles. That's for medium and heavy duty vehicle charging and hydrogen infrastructure. And then our first block grant program was for light duty EVs. That's Cal EVIP, the California Vehicle Infrastructure Incentive Project. And I think there's a second iteration of that now active. There's also another light duty block grant program called Communities in Charge that's getting up and running. And our website has more information than those than I'm able to share today. But primarily, those are to just get chargers in the ground. Going back to the AB 2127 analysis, we're looking at a need for just huge numbers of chargers, yes, along the 2025 goals, but then the 2030 goals and beyond, right? One of the main takeaways from the 2127 report was over 1 million chargers likely needed by 2030. That's not counting single family houses. That is shared private, such as workplace or multifamily dwellings or public chargers. Now, to incentivize workplace charging, I think many of those block grant projects or targeted areas could cover workplace charging. And again, to highlight, that is very grid-friendly charging, to take in the charge during the noon hour. We want to optimize the speed and smoothness of these block grants. So as of now, we don't have specific adders for bi-directional equipment, but that is something we're actively considering, and there are conversations ongoing and at the right time to introduce them without creating more complexity and delay with the main block grant program. That is our intention. And we've also had targeted solicitations involving bi-directional charging. On the vehicle side now, the CEC would have less funding authority there, and I think that's more for the California Air Resources Board, and of course there are federal incentives and such with the new national EV programs that's coming more to the fore, and there might be items involving infrastructure and vehicles that will be coordinated on in the future for that. So I hope that answers the workplace charging question. I'm happy to offer more about the question of AC or level 2 bi-directional charging if you like, or we could raise other questions.
I think that's about all the time we have. It is past 1:30. John, did you want to take it from here?
Yeah, so my name.
You're muted, John.
Okay, so my name is John Spigalski. I'm with the Slow.
John Migelski from the Slow Climate Coalition, ladies and gentlemen. There you go.
So I put my name in the email in the chat. And please contact me any feedback on this webinar or any suggestions for future topics. I want to thank the presenters for the exceptional work on this important topic. We're going to get to the top of that mountain top, right? All of us together. It's going to be great looking down from there. And I want to thank the people that helped put on this webinar, Justin, Barry Rands, Michael Hiss, Joe Jamick, and June Cochran. And thank you for participating. There are some additional Drive Electric Weeks here in Slow City. I don't know if we have a slide for that, but Barry, you want to give a quick shout out for that?
Yes, here we go. This is the Electrify Your Life Showcase, September 29th from 6 to 9. That's during our famous Slow Farmers Market. So come out and see the electric cars just to check them out. And I think there's going to be an F-150 there, right, Barry?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And then after that, we have the Ride and Drive on the October 1st. That's Saturday, this coming Saturday at 9 a.m. Behind the Target. And that's when you actually can get a ride in some of these cars and have an owner drive you around. So we're very excited about these events that Barry has organized.
I miss those farmers markets.
Yeah, they're great. So thanks again, panelists. This has been really great. I think we're going to continue the questions if y'all can stick around. What's the plan with the questions? Are we going to end the recording now and continue?
So we will send everyone a copy of the video link. We'll send the chat, and we'll try to answer any questions we can and follow up with people. We can leave it open if people want to continue, but we have kept it a while. We, with permission, will send the slides from the presenters to people who attended. We had some requests in the chat for the slides. So, yeah. But it's where we've taken a lot of your time already, and so we understand if you have to move on. But
exactly. But if you can stay, we're welcome, and you want to answer more questions, we'll have more. All right. So
we're done.
Is that a anyone do you guys need to leave? Josh, Kyle, Jacob?
I can stay on for 10 more minutes.
10 more?
That sounds
a bit more.
Yeah, I can say
Okay.
a little longer too.
Barry, 10 more minutes.
Okay, well, I got some more questions here. So one for Jacob.
Oh, I was
Let's
just
see.
signing off. Sorry. Just
Okay, the CCS connection on the Ford F-150 Lightning. Is it true the questioner, his understanding was that it does not implement the new ISO CCS standard? Will the Lightning adopt that standard in the future, or will existing vehicles be upgradable?
So that's a great question. We'll have to probably dig into that as far as upgradability is concerned. The standard that was developed at the time when we were designing and building our vehicle was 15108-2. And then earlier this year, -20 was introduced. -20 is
Right.
not backwards compatible with -2. So it requires a whole new software module and whole new way of doing things to make it functional. You know, will the existing CPU computing power that's on this particular module be able to take on -20 as a future upgrade? We'll have to study that. I don't have an answer to that. But of course, future vehicles will have -20. It takes us about 3 to 4 years once the standard has been released, to actually bring it to market. So that's just how long the development time is.
Yeah, so the implication is that the Ford F-150 will only do V2G with the compatible charger that Ford sells. But if it eventually gets to this -20 standard, then it'll operate with other third-party V2G chargers. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And there may be, and again, I haven't talked to their, product development team. They may come up with a patch or a fix where, a certain module can be replaced as an upgrade, which will make it more compatible. That's obviously an option, but that I don't know if the design team has thought through that piece of it, or are they planning for that? I can certainly take that back as a request that to be considered.
Okay, I just was looking through the questions I had, and I think we covered everything that I had. Is maybe we can raise some hands, or
Could Kyle respond to Alex's question? I'm not sure you got a good answer. I thought Kyle was ready to talk to that point.
Sure, yeah, that's an item I was thinking of. I was asked about the workplace incentives specifically and went over CPUC and CARB investments. But there was a request in the chat to repeat Alex's original question. And if I'm reading the right one, this is it. Early question that I'm hoping will be answered in the presentations. As a public agency, we are trying to figure out which charging infrastructure to invest in terms of cost per kilowatt of charger. The level 2 plus, I'm not sure what plus means, are clear winners. Is V2G strictly limited to a DCFC, meaning DC fast charging style charger? Or is there a coming option for level 2 style chargers? How can we future-proof what we're doing now? So a lot of this comes down to a point I mentioned earlier, talking about the UCSD presentation from Jan Kleisel, where it matches well to have bidirectional charging occur in the first place. Because sometimes you're plugged in and you need maximum charge the entire time. A good example is a highway side fast charging station. You're on a road trip. You want to kindly take your charge and keep driving, not wait for it for more grid-friendly charging, not discharge. You just want to get your charge and go. And that's a lot of the high-power DC fast charging infrastructure right now. So that's kind of an irony, right? When DC is the most easy to integrate into a bidirectional framework for the grid, but AC is more difficult for reasons I'll get to. And then there's other situations, I'll call it long dwell time charging, where there's much better opportunity to either shift the load around and still plug out with the charge that you need. That's general vehicle grid integration, or V1G. And then also if the standards are correct and the permissions and your range is not impacted, those are all kind of configurable, set it and forget it customer options in the market we're envisioning. Then you could discharge some power. So there's higher availability for power discharging in long dwell time events. And there's kind of this sad irony that most of the lower power long dwell charging settings are alternating current, AC. Now, why is that so different from DC? Here's a physical reason. Utilities want to very clearly understand what devices are putting power back onto their grids. They have experience with solar, solar and batteries, and I should say, solar creates direct current, and that's the same as batteries, and that's the same as EV batteries take. There are inverters in these solar systems, and that's what utilities want to know about, and there's a Rule 21 interconnection process. For DC charging, the situation is very similar. The inverters are bolted to the ground in the device. They don't move around. The utilities can understand them. That's like Ford's charging station right now. It's a DC solution. It has an inverter, which is extra equipment, and maybe it's a bit of extra cost, but it allows market participation now. And that's important. But this lower power DC charging is kind of new to the charging taxonomy. Typically, low power has been AC because they're cheaper chargers. When you have AC charging and want to discharge to the grid, the car's inverter becomes important for that. And the utilities need to know about the car's inverter. It's much more complicated when cars are driving around or maybe different cars connect. And not all the standards are fully fleshed out for that yet. So that's the main consideration for AC. So first, what kind of charging event is best for bidirectionality? And two, physically and process-wise, how can this charger connect and participate in the market? Now, going out in the future, let's say bidirectional chargers are more common, and you might even have some corner or unique cases, maybe using a little bit of imagination, where say you could have very high power discharging. Let's say this by the freeway, there's that fast charging station, but it accepts bidirectionality. Who would want to do that? Well, maybe sometimes on a hot afternoon, there might be some good Samaritan who wants to discharge their car battery at a higher power than they could at home and make some money while they're at it. Well, sure, that could be an application. I'm not sure how feasible that is, and certainly it's not right around the corner, but that's one example of what could happen if you have more widespread bidirectional EVs and chargers.
Yeah, that's an interesting dichotomy, or juxtaposition between the level 2 and the fast charging. My instinct is that the level 2 is really the way that we're going to see this bidirectional grid support happen.
Right, and even the word level 2, or the term level 2, has typically meant low power and AC, but really we should talk about levels in terms of just power, kilowatts. And having this low power DC, do you want to call that level 2 or not? Well, that's part of kind of refining the taxonomy here. But yes, that is what's currently available.
Okay, I think we have a question from Lawrence.
Yes, thank you. I put it in the chat, but I've heard from Nuvi people recently in a few different seminars where they're focusing just as much on the AC as on the DC. And I'm wondering if anybody can describe what is required from the car. Does the car's inverter have to be grid compliant and the Nuvi AC bidirectional charger just connects it to the grid? Or does the bidirectional charger phase shift it or do anything in order to connect to the grid? Because it seems like you're asking a lot from the car manufacturer to put all of that in the car and you just hook it up AC to AC to your house or building. Whereas a DC charger, of course, you've got the DC coming out of the car and all of the inversion and synchronization, decision when to turn on and off happens on a non-moving piece of equipment.
And that is why we chose that topology, Lawrence. And I would say that for AC, there are two ways of doing it. One way would be that the inverter that's on the vehicle is totally grid compliant, which is what I talked about earlier, that it would need to have certifications and testing done by a third-party national lab. The other option is that you have a intermediate box that sits on the wall. It doesn't do all the power conversion, but just manages the electronic and data communication with the grid. So getting the grid signals and so forth, and then communicating it back. And that device could be a separate device that is now certified and to meet the utilities UL certifications, etc. And we offload that from the vehicle into a separate piece of hardware, so that can manage separately through software updates and so forth, as opposed to tying the entire vehicle down every time there is a glitch that has to be now flashed and updated in the vehicle. So lots of ways of doing it, but I think that those are the two different topologies, I think.
Right, I understand why Ford is doing it that way, but my question remains, why is Nuvi focusing, it looks like half of its effort or even more on the AC bidirectional, and are any cars compliant with that? So I guess, is there anybody who can represent Nuvi's thought process on this?
I can talk a little bit more about AC. Now, I don't have as much background as on Nuvi specifically. I wonder if this is in reference to Europe, but assuming it's North America, then there's a resource I shared in one of my last slides that I'd like to point you to. It's a workshop we held on May 17th of this year. The title is the Vehicle to Grid Inverter List. But now, having gathered stakeholder feedback and better understanding the parameters of that list, which I'll explain about, we're having a more general name. We'll call it the V2G equipment list. So not inverters specifically, but different equipment that is certified by Underwriters Laboratory, UL, and others for the safety certifications. So the materials connected to that workshop have a good body of knowledge as to what to initially put on that list as far as DC-based V2G charging solutions, but also discussion about the emerging market and emerging standards for AC, and that still needs some time to mature. But for information and backgrounds, better than I'm able to share today, I encourage you to look there. And then that list overall, we're trying to provide that as an information resource to hopefully make the process of utility interconnection easier. Now, in no way is this a required component of this process. When we're talking about Rule 21 and CPUC and utilities getting together, you know, in that room, so to speak, they didn't talk about the necessary existence of a list. But we think that very similar to the CEC's current solar equipment list, that can be a resource that could speed along the process and require less work of utilities to interconnect these things. So right now, the road is clear for utilities to interconnect DC-based resources in this way. What we want to add, so in other words, this is not a locked door as part of the process, it's more like a skateboard to go faster. We want to add just a list that's accessible to all of equipment that's where we've reviewed the UL certifications and other documentation to make sure that the equipment is safe to go on utilities grids. This is work that utilities can do themselves. But again, similarly to the solar equipment list resource, and for statutory reasons, this one for vehicles has to be separate, and we're working on implementing that. But we intend to provide it as an information resource. And the coordination around this is a good source of information for the market status of AC bidirectional charging.
Couple of hands up.
As well.
Couple hands up, Sheila, and then
Okay,
Jose.
thank you. So I'm new at this, and I'm wondering if the Powerwall 2, which I'm in line for due to supply chain issues, but I've purchased it. I don't have an EV yet, and I'm not decided on exactly what kind. But does the Powerwall 2 even factor into V2G process, or do you just need a bidirectional charging car to export to the grid with a specific control unit on the wall?
Oh, I can take that. So the Powerwall has its own relationship with the grid. So Tesla has a I forget what they call it. There's a unit that handles all four
Gateway.
segments, the gateway, right? And that gateway handles the transmission of power to the grid. That is actually handled right now through your NEM agreement.
Oh,
And
okay.
you can send power to the grid, and the utility will receive that power and give you credit for it as if it were solar power.
Well, I'm sending power to the grid now, anytime I
Your
have
solar.
surplus from my solar.
Yeah.
Um,
Tesla
But if
will allow you to send power to the grid basically anytime with your Powerwall.
and with a car that's bidirectional.
Well, no, that's with the Powerwall. The car's not so much yet. That's the future that we've been talking about this whole time.
Okay, so buying a bidirectional car is a little premature right now. If I want to buy an EV, I'm not necessarily looking for a bidirectional car just yet.
Yes, there's only one really, right?
Okay,
Am I wrong about that? The F-150, I think, is the only one.
okay.
A lot of vehicles have bidirectional capability. You know, the Nissan Leaf can
Well,
actually
Nissan, yeah.
is bidirectional capable. Kia and Hyundai's newest offerings as well. It's just a matter of, again, you know, what's the use case, right? You know, you can
Okay.
set up a home backup system potentially, but you know, you're still in the early stages here. It is, you know, I could conceive of it being as a future-proofing move to buy bidirectional capable EV. But right now, you know, and again, I don't know that there's actually a price premium to that. So I think it kind of base your decision more on a, you know, mobility focused approach. But in the coming years, you know, once additional rates and bidirectional chargers are rolled out, that's going to become a bit more clear, I think. You know, but should factor a bit more into your calculus. right
Yeah,
now, again, we're still pretty early on this, but there are opportunities for you to be able to utilize that vehicle currently.
And I figure the EV charger that I have installed, let's say it's a fast charging level 2 charger, that's one direction. That's taking power from my storage and providing power to the car that I have. So I'm not worried about a bi-directional EV charger. Not yet.
yeah, there aren't very many of those either. But I think the simple rule of thumb would be if you get a car that has a CCS connector, it'll either be bi-directional capable or be able to be updated to bi-directional capability because the hardware is there. It just depends on your charger at home.
Okay.
Okay, Jose.
Thank you.
Jose?
I have a question for Kyle. Thanks for the mention, by the way. You mentioned the list that the CEC is preparing of bi-directional EV service equipment. Two questions. One is, could you put the link to that process in the chat? And the other is, do you have any estimate of when that list is going to be? I know the CEC is working on the process. I'm wondering when that is going to be operational, because the first consumer level ones are going to come out early next year. And I'm wondering if the CEC is going to be ready to put things on that list when they come out.
All right, well, thank you so much. And yeah, I appreciate all the information you shared in the previous presentation and your question today. I'll find the link for the chat after this answer. But again, that's the May 17th, 2022 workshop titled the Vehicle to Grid Inverter List. As far as the time frame, we've done a lot of internal coordination before the workshop and afterward as to say which division this will land in, renewable energy division or fuels and transportation division. We thought it would be most efficient to just roll this into the existing solar equipment list, but then working with our staff attorney's office, discovered that it's probably less supported to do that because of the mandate from SB1, which led to the creation of the original solar equipment list, kind of stretching that out and incorporating more than it was originally conceived to include is probably going to be a bridge too far. So a new list would have to be created. So right there, just process-wise, that's unfortunately a little bit of inefficiency. And right now we are coordinating with our information technology services branch and the renewable energy division to replicate their process where it's necessary, but also leave off some extra things from the solar equipment list that we don't really require for the V2G list, but also keeping our list adaptable such that the submission form can accept alternating current type equipment as well in the future. And if there's any kind of power control system certification needed or any software certification paired with the hardware, those are cases we're trying to do as well. You asked about a time frame, and to be very frank, I don't think I can give a specific month, but we're hoping to have something public, or at least another workshop or updates to the public about this later this year. We're in the process of getting a website up and running, but then standing up the application submission process and review process. In some ways, this is probably going to look different from the existing solar equipment list, maybe a little more streamlined, or certainly is the hope, because in some ways there are fewer moving parts, in some ways there are more moving parts. It is a new area for us, and we feel the pressure from stakeholders to move fast on it, and that's something that we intend to do, but we don't want it to break on the first day either. So we want to ensure the integrity of the process and that staff are prepared to know which parts of this documentation to review to keep the conveyor belt going and have these pieces of equipment not certified, but confirmed as having been certified and added to the list. I hope that answers your question.
Pretty much, yeah.
And this is wonderful. Jacob just said he had to leave at the end of the hour, and you guys have been so generous with your time. Thank you, Jacob. Take care. Oh, you're there. Okay. Okay, well, bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Yeah, thanks,
Yeah,
everyone.
bye Joshua, bye Kyle. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
All right.
2 hours, that's pretty long.
Pretty long, super wonky. Love it.
Yeah.
Anybody have final thoughts?
My house, I have solar, right? But I have micro inverters. So my panels produce AC basically. It's just, you save about 3 or 4% in efficiency. At that time they were, they're a little more expensive, but they're better for my shading issues. But I wonder how many people are like that. It's AC from the solar, not DC. And
well, the AC goes back to the grid straight anyway, so that your microinverters and your solar going to the grid is one thing. If you're talking about wanting to take your solar and take it as DC to your car,
well,
you need to get rid of the microinverters and go to optimizers and
well, that didn't happen.
Redo your system. So what your solar system is doing is fine. The car is a separate
issue. Yeah, it was the integration of the car and the chargers and
right.
You can charge your car off your solar inverter if it's an islanding inverter like the SMA Sunny Boy, that when the grid goes down, you can plug in one 15 amp 120 volt plug into the inverter directly, and then you could plug that into the car to charge it.
Yeah, I think the key to all of this is something like that. I'm forgetting the name again, the Tesla gateway, that it actually manages that connection to the grid, has the click off to island, like Lauren said, the islanding. You got to have that device that can island you, and then you have a lot of options after that.
Yeah, and there are fairly inexpensive devices you can get that simulate a generator. And it's a little bit tricky because you don't want to overpower the circuit with too much generation capability. But basically the thing looks like a diesel generator. It's just electronic though, and runs off a small battery that can be recharged. But it gives you the initial signal, and then a grid following inverter adds to that signal to give you your microgrid or your island. I've seen these sold out of China, basically saying, hey, you don't really need a diesel generator to have your own system. Use your existing grid following inverter and our device. I don't know how much luck people have had with them, but it sounds like a pretty great technology if it works.
Yeah, there's a lot of bootleg ways to island your home and use your battery storage, but that's not a mainstream market way, and it's not going to get it to the grid, which is, kind of ultimately the goal.
Well, I think some people want to, if they do